Disappear, you cheap old man, my son-in-law roared, shoving me hard down the stairs. I tumbled, ribs cracking, head slamming against the steps. My daughter stood above me, laughing coldly. Let him lie there and think about his behavior. They thought I was just a helpless old burden they could throw away, but right before the pain swallowed my consciousness, I managed to dial one number. When the police arrived and realized exactly who was lying broken and bleeding on the floor, they froze in shock and shouted in fury. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Russell Harrison. I'm 68 years old, and I live in a 3-story Victorian house on Lafayette Street in Capitol Hill, Denver. Spent 42 years as a police officer, retiring 5 years ago as chief inspector. Always believed in justice, in doing things by the book. That philosophy served me well in my career. Turns out I'd need it in my personal life too. My daughter Danielle moved in a year ago with her husband Matthew. Just temporary, Dad, she'd said, her eyes wide with that desperate look I'd seen 1,000 times in interrogation rooms. Matthew's business hit a rough patch. We need a few months to get back on our feet. Danielle wasn't always like this. I remember her at 7, sitting on my shoulders at the 4th of July parade, sticky cotton candy in her hair, laughing at the fire trucks. She'd wanted to be a police officer too back then. Somewhere between that bright-eyed girl and the 35-year-old woman standing in my doorway with expensive luggage and an entitled expression, something had shifted. Matthew Cooper, my son-in-law, 37 years old, failed entrepreneur with a handshake like a dead fish, and eyes that never quite met mine. He'd swept Danielle off her feet 3 years ago with promises of luxury and success. The luxury came from maxed-out credit cards. The success never materialized. The first month was tolerable. They kept to themselves, made an effort to contribute. Matthew even helped me fix a broken fence post, though he complained about splinters the entire time. Danielle cooked dinner twice, burned it both times, then stopped trying. Month 2, the mask started slipping. I was in my workshop one Saturday afternoon, sanding down a cherry wood table I'd been crafting. Woodworking had become my retirement passion, the smell of sawdust and the rhythm of creation something that calmed my mind after decades of seeing humanity's worst. Through the open window, I heard Matthew on his phone in the backyard. "Yeah, the old man's loaded," he said, voice dripping with contempt. "House is worth at least $500,000, plus whatever he's got saved up. We just need to play it smart." I stopped sanding. The detective in me noted the tone, the calculation. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I'd learned patience during 4 decades of investigations. By month 4, the comments became direct. Danielle walked into the kitchen one morning while I was making coffee. She looked at me like I was an inconvenience, a stain on her expensive blouse. "Dad, Matthew and I need the master bedroom. Your room gets better light." I stared at her over my mug. "This is my house, Danielle." She rolled her eyes. "Don't be difficult. We're doing you a favor by being here. You'd be lonely otherwise." The audacity took my breath away. "A favor? You're getting old. What if you fall? Who'd help you?" Her voice had that syrupy manipulation I'd heard from countless con artists. "We're here for you." I moved to the master bedroom, not because I believed her concern was genuine, but because I was documenting everything. Every boundary crossed, every demand. Old habits. Month 6 brought Matthew's declaration at dinner. He'd made himself at home, feet up on my coffee table, eating takeout from containers that cost more than I'd spent on groceries in a month. "Russell, I've got a business opportunity. Tech startup. Ground floor investment. I need 50 grand. I set down my fork carefully. $50,000. It's a sure thing. You'd get it back triple in a year. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like my money was already his. "No." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Matthew's face darkened. Danielle's eyes went cold. "Dad, don't be selfish," she snapped. "We're family. Family helps each other." "Family doesn't treat each other like ATM machines," I replied, my voice level. Years of testifying in court had taught me to stay calm when everyone else lost control. Matthew stood up, and for a second I saw genuine anger flash across his face. "You're being unreasonable. We live here. Take care of you." Take care of me? I laughed, bitter and sharp. You change the locks on 2 bedrooms. You eat my food, use my utilities, and I haven't seen a dime in rent. That's not taking care of someone. That's squatting with entitlement. How dare you? Danielle's voice rose to a shriek. After everything we've done, you're just a selfish old man who can't stand to see us succeed. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting. Get out of my house. What? Matthew's voice was dangerous now. You heard me. I want you both out by the end of the month. Danielle's laugh was cruel. You can't kick us out. We have tenant rights, and good luck explaining to everyone why you're throwing your only daughter onto the street. She was right about the tenant rights. Colorado law required formal eviction procedures, but she was wrong about something else. I'd been a cop long enough to know how to build a case. As they stormed off to their room, Matthew muttered just loud enough for me to hear, Old fool doesn't know when he's a burden. I stood in my empty living room, hand shaking slightly as I gripped the back of a chair. The house felt different now, not like home, like enemy territory. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. I wasn't going to be a victim in my own house. I'd spent 4 decades upholding the law, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Time to protect myself. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I kept thinking about Danielle at 16, crying in my arms after her first heartbreak. I'd told her she deserved better, that she was strong and smart and capable of anything. She'd believed me then. When had she stopped believing in herself and started believing in shortcuts? I remembered Matthew and Danielle's wedding 3 years ago. Small ceremony, her mother, my ex-wife, sitting on the opposite side of the aisle, not speaking to me. Danielle had been radiant in her dress, and when Matthew said his vows, I'd wanted to believe he meant them. I'd wanted to believe my daughter had found someone who'd cherish her. Sitting at the reception, watching them dance, I'd caught Matthew checking his phone during their first dance. A small thing. A red flag I'd ignored because I wanted her to be happy. The next morning, I started documenting everything. Old habits from decades of police work kicked in automatically. I kept a small digital recorder in my workshop, voice-activated. If they wanted to plot in my house, I'd have evidence. I photographed the changed locks, the mess they left in common areas, the expensive deliveries that arrived almost daily, all charged to credit cards they couldn't pay. I saved every text message from Danielle demanding money, every voicemail from Matthew with thinly veiled threats. 3 days after our confrontation, I was in my workshop when I heard them in the kitchen directly below. The vents carried sound perfectly. We need to speed this up, Matthew said. The old man's getting suspicious. He's always suspicious. It's the cop brain. Danielle's voice was dismissive. He can't prove anything. What if we just, I don't know, wait him out? He's 68. How much longer can he really? Don't be stupid. He could live another 20 years. I'm not waiting that long. Papers rustled. His will leaves everything to me anyway. We just need to make life uncomfortable enough that he signs the house over willingly. Or we get power of attorney, claim he's losing it mentally. My hands stilled on the piece of oak I'd been planing, my own daughter, discussing me like I was already dead. Matthew laughed. Your mom would love that. Crazy old Russell can't take care of himself. The recorder captured every word. I thought about confronting them. 42 years of facing down criminals made me confident I could handle my own daughter and her parasitic husband. But anger clouds judgment. I'd seen too many cases fall apart because someone acted on emotion instead of evidence. That evening, I went for a walk around the neighborhood. Capitol Hill in February was cold. Snow piled along the sidewalks, the mountain air crisp and sharp. I passed Mrs. Chen's house. She'd been my neighbor for 15 years. She waved from her window. Russell, haven't seen you much lately. Been busy, Margaret. How's your hip? Better. Those kids of yours keeping you company? I forced a smile. They're keeping me on my toes. If she only knew. I walked past the houses I'd protected during my career. Robbery on Oak Street in 2003. Domestic disturbance on Franklin in 2011. Missing person on Lafayette, found safe in 2017. I knew every street, every shortcut, every story. This was my neighborhood, my city, my home, and I'd be damned if I let anyone take it from me. Back at the house, I found Matthew in my study, rifling through my filing cabinet. "What are you doing?" He didn't even have the grace to look guilty. "Looking for the property deed. Danielle wants to know what the house is worth." "Get out of my office." "It's not your office anymore, Russell. It's our house, too." He smirked, that entitled twist of his lips that made my fists clench. "Legally, we're residents. We have rights." I stepped closer, and years of commanding crime scenes made my voice like ice. "Touch my files again, and tenant rights won't protect you from a trespassing charge." Something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or calculation. He left, but the message was clear. They weren't just staying. They were positioning themselves to take everything. That night, I sat in my workshop surrounded by half-finished furniture and the smell of wood shavings. My phone sat on the workbench, the recorder app active. I'd collected hours of conversations now. Conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, attempted theft. I pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. Years of building cases had taught me to be methodical. Document everything, build an airtight narrative. Present facts, not emotions. But there was something else. Something they didn't know about me. Something that would change everything when the time came. I thought about my badge, locked away in a drawer upstairs. The commendations. The cases solved. The lives saved. I'd retired as chief inspector of the Denver Police Department. I'd trained half the current force. I'd built relationships with judges, prosecutors, fellow officers who'd walk through fire for me. Matthew and Danielle thought they were dealing with a helpless old man, a burden, an obstacle. They had no idea who they were really up against. I looked at my phone, at the growing file of evidence, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, something colder, more focused. Determination. I'd spent my entire career fighting for justice, making sure the law protected the innocent and punished the guilty. I'd done it for strangers, for victims I'd never met, for a city that depended on officers like me to stand between chaos and order. Now it was time to do it for myself. I closed the legal pad and stood up, my knees protesting less than they had a week ago. Funny how purpose could make you feel younger. I had work to do, evidence to gather, a case to build. Matthew wanted to play games with an old man. Fine, but he was playing against a chief inspector with 4 decades of experience in taking down people far more dangerous than him. This was going to be interesting. The next few days I watched them differently, not as a father watches his daughter and her husband, as an investigator watches suspects. Matthew had patterns. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening he disappeared for 3 hours. "Business meetings," he claimed. But when he returned, his clothes smelled like cheap beer and cigarettes, and I caught glimpses of poker chips in his jacket pocket. He was gambling, losing, judging by the increasingly frantic phone calls he took in hushed tones. One evening I stood in my workshop doorway and watched him pace the backyard. He was on his phone, voice tight with desperation. "I know I owe you, Tony. I just need another week. I've got something lined up." A pause. "No, it's solid. The old man's going to come through." The old man. Me. Their retirement plan. I almost laughed. The arrogance of assuming I'd just hand over my savings to cover his gambling debts. As if my decades of careful planning, of living modestly and saving responsibly, existed solely to bail out his poor choices. Danielle was subtler, but no less mercenary. She'd started bringing home real estate magazines, leaving them casually on the coffee table. Properties in Boulder, Aspen, places she could never afford. I caught her photographing my house, taking pictures of the crown molding, the original hardwood floors, the stained glass windows. "Just showing Mom how nice the place looks," she said when I asked. My ex-wife, of course. Barbara had always believed I'd retired with a fortune hidden away. The truth was more modest, a decent pension, some savings, the house. Comfortable, but not wealthy. Not enough to fund Danielle's champagne dreams on a beer budget. I started keeping detailed notes. Matthew's gambling schedule, the times they went through my mail, the days Danielle made calls to contractors, asking about home valuations. Every small theft, $50 from my wallet, bottles from my liquor cabinet, even the vintage watch that had been my father's, now mysteriously missing. The recorder in my workshop captured everything. Their plans grew bolder. They discussed forging power of attorney documents. They talked about finding a doctor who'd declare me incompetent. They even joked about which assisted living facility would take me. The cheaper, the better, Matthew had said, laughing. Why waste money keeping him comfortable? My daughter had agreed. I sat in my workshop that evening, listening to the playback, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger anymore, something more clinical, more focused. This was no longer about family. This was a case. Suspect. 1. Danielle Harrison Cooper, 35, demonstrated clear intent to defraud and manipulate elderly parent for financial gain. Motive, greed. Method, emotional manipulation and legal coercion. Suspect 2. Matthew Cooper, 37, gambling addict with significant debt. Approximately $3,200 per week in poker losses based on overheard conversations. Motive, desperation. Method, intimidation and elder abuse. I pulled out my old case notebook, the leather-bound journal I'd carried for 20 years as chief inspector. The pages were mostly blank now, but the habits remained. Document everything. Build the timeline. Anticipate their moves. They thought they were so clever. Changing locks. Hiding mail. Whispering in corners. But they'd never investigated a crime in their lives. They didn't know how to cover their tracks, because they didn't realize they were leaving tracks to cover. I did. The front door slammed. They were going out, probably to another one of Matthew's business meetings. I waited until I heard his car pull away, then went into the master bedroom, the room that used to be mine. Danielle's laptop sat on the dresser, lid closed but not locked. Sloppy. I opened it. No password. Even sloppier. Her email was already logged in. I scrolled through her sent messages. There, an email to my ex-wife from 2 days ago. Mom, I think Dad's losing it. He accused Matthew of stealing from him yesterday. There was no money missing, but he insisted there was. I'm worried about his mental state. Maybe we should look into guardianship. Lies. Every word. But carefully crafted lies designed to build a narrative of incompetence. I took photos with my phone. Evidence for the evidence file. Her browser history showed recent searches. How to get power of attorney over elderly parent. Signs of dementia in seniors. Legal guardianship, Colorado. More photos. In the closet, stuffed behind her shoes, I found a folder. Inside were printouts of my bank statements. How had she gotten those? With my account balance highlighted. $127,000 in savings. Not a fortune, but more than they'd expected, judging by the exclamation points in the margins. There was also a handwritten note in Matthew's scrawl. Equity in house, $487,000. Total liquid assets, $154,000. Timeline, 6 months, max. 6 months until what? Until they had control? Until they'd bled me dry? I photographed everything, put it back exactly as I'd found it, and returned to my workshop. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the folder, the timeline, the casual cruelty of reducing a human life to dollar signs and deadlines. The next morning, Matthew came down for breakfast, already in a foul mood. He grabbed the coffee I'd made and dumped it down the sink. This tastes like dirt. Can't you do anything right? I bit back the response I wanted to give, that I'd been making coffee since before he was born, and simply nodded. I'll make a fresh pot. Don't bother. We're going out. They left together, Danielle not even acknowledging my existence as she walked past. I stood at the window and watched them drive away in the BMW. Matthew had leased with money he didn't have, heading toward a brunch they couldn't afford, planning a future built on my destruction, and I smiled. Because they had no idea what was coming? I'd spent 42 years learning how to build cases that prosecutors called airtight. I knew how to gather evidence that stood up in court. I knew which judges valued thoroughness and which lawyers had the killer instinct needed for complex cases. More importantly, I knew exactly how long to wait before making my move. Not too early. You need the pattern established, the evidence overwhelming. Not too late. You can't let the suspects gain too much ground. The timing had to be perfect. I looked at my phone, at the growing collection of photos and recordings, and started making a mental checklist of what I still needed. Matthew and Danielle thought they were hunting a wounded animal. They didn't realize the animal had teeth. The following Monday, I had an appointment. Not that I told them where I was going. As far as Danielle and Matthew knew, I was getting groceries. Instead, I drove downtown to a law office on 16th Street. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place that charged by the quarter hour and didn't waste time on small cases. Perfect. I'd researched Gerald Wilson for a week before making the call. Family law specialist with a focus on elder abuse cases. Former prosecutor. Reputation for being aggressive in court. Exactly what I needed. His receptionist led me to a corner office with a view of the mountains. Wilson himself was late 50s, steel gray hair, and the kind of steady gaze that came from years of cross-examining liars. "Mr. Harrison, please, sit." He gestured to a leather chair. "You mentioned on the phone this was regarding family matters." I pulled out my phone and placed it on his desk. "I have approximately 14 hours of recorded conversations. I also have photographs, bank statements, and a detailed timeline documenting attempted elder abuse and fraud." His eyebrows rose slightly. "That's thorough. I was chief inspector of Denver PD for 12 years, detective for 20 before that. I know how to build a case." Recognition flickered across his face. "Harrison, Russell Harrison, I remember you. You testified in the Mendoza murder trial, 7 years ago?" "8. Your firm handled the civil suit for the victim's family." He nodded slowly, leaning back in his chair. "What exactly are we dealing with here?" I spent the next hour laying it out. Every detail, every recorded conversation, every stolen dollar, every forged signature on documents they didn't know I'd found, every lie they'd told. Wilson listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Harrison, I'll be direct with you. This is one of the most well-documented cases of elder abuse I've seen in 20 years of practice. You have them dead to rights on multiple felonies." "I know. What's your goal here? Criminal prosecution? Civil suit? Both?" "Both. I want them held accountable under the law, every applicable law." He smiled slightly. "You don't do things halfway, do you?" "I was a cop for 42 years. Halfway wasn't an option." We discussed strategy for another hour. He'd review all my evidence, build a formal case, prepare documentation. But he warned me this would get ugly. Family cases always did. "They'll fight back," he said. "They'll claim you're senile, vindictive, making things up. Your daughter will cry in court. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Danielle laughing as I lay injured, about Matthew's casual cruelty, about the timeline giving me 6 months before they destroyed everything I'd built. "I'm prepared." "There's something else," Wilson said. "Given your background, the media will be interested if this goes to trial." Former chief inspector versus his own family. It's a story. Let them be interested. I've got nothing to hide. He stood, extending his hand. Then let's make sure they have everything to hide. I'll draw up the initial documents and be in touch within 3 days. I left his office feeling lighter than I had in months. The wheels were in motion, but I wasn't done yet. My next stop was a private investigator's office in Cherry Creek. Small operation, one-man shop, but Marcus Chen had a reputation for discretion and finding things people wanted to stay hidden. "I need a background check," I told him, sliding a folder across his desk. "Matthew Cooper. Everything. Financial records, known associates, criminal history, if any." Chen glanced at the information I'd provided. "This about divorce?" "Something like that." He quoted me a price. $2,800 for a comprehensive report within a week. I paid half up front in cash. Then came the bank. I met with my account manager, a woman named Patricia Rodriguez, who'd handled my finances for a decade. "I need to make some changes to my accounts," I told her. "Security measures." I had her set up alerts for any unusual activity, changed all my passwords, added 2-factor authentication, removed Danielle as my emergency contact. She'd somehow gotten herself added to my records 3 months ago without my knowledge. "Is everything all right, Mr. Harrison?" Patricia asked, concern evident in her voice. "Just being careful. At my age, you can't be too cautious." She didn't need to know more than that. The drive home took me through Capitol Hill's tree-lined streets. I'd lived in this neighborhood for 30 years, raised Danielle here, buried my marriage here, built a life. I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me. When I got back to the house, Matthew's car was in the driveway. I could hear voices from the living room, loud, agitated. I walked in to find them hunched over a laptop, faces tight with stress. "Everything all right?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Matthew slammed the laptop shut. "Fine, just work stuff." But I'd seen the screen. Debt collection agency website. Amount owed $47,300. More than I'd thought. Much more. Danielle's eyes were red. She'd been crying. "Dad, we need to talk," she said. "About money." Here we go, I thought. The next demand. What about it? Matthew's business had some unexpected expenses. We need help, just a loan. We'll pay you back. How much? They exchanged glances. Matthew cleared his throat. 50,000. The same number from before, when I'd said no. But now they were desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. "Let me think about it," I said. Hope flared in Danielle's eyes. "Really?" I said, "I'll think about it. I need a few days." Matthew stood up, his posture aggressive. "We need an answer now." I looked at him calmly. "Then the answer is no." His face darkened. "You selfish?" "Matthew," Danielle cut him off, though her own expression was furious. "Dad, please. We're family." "I know. That's why I need time to consider it properly." I headed toward my workshop. "I'll let you know by the end of the week." I could feel their eyes on my back as I climbed the stairs, could hear them whispering urgently the moment I was out of sight. In my workshop, locked the door behind me and pulled out my evidence file. Wilson would have the legal documentation ready in 3 days. Chen would have the background report in a week. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed one more thing. I needed them to make a mistake. A big one. Something undeniable that would remove any shadow of doubt when this went to court. And if there was one thing I'd learned in 4 decades of police work, it was this. Desperate people always make mistakes. All I had to do was wait for it. I sat at my workbench, running my hand over the smooth surface of the cherry wood table I'd been building. Patience had always been my strength. Watching. I waited. I let them reveal themselves through their own choices and behavior. That's when I finally understood how to make them answer for everything they had done. Not with rage, not with vengeance, through their own greed, their impatience, and their unshakable belief that I was nothing more than a frail old man they could easily outmaneuver. I gave a small, quiet smile inside my workshop. The groundwork was laid. Now I simply had to let them step right into the consequences they were creating for themselves. 2 days later, the situation shifted. It was early evening. I'd spent the afternoon in the workshop, applying the final coats of varnish to a bookshelf. The warm, clean smell of lacquer filled the space, and for a few hours I had almost managed to put everything else out of my mind. Almost. Around 7 I heard Matthew's car roll into the driveway. The engine went silent, then came the sharp slam of a door. A second slam followed. He was clearly in one of his tempers. I put my tools away and started down the stairs. The staircase from the upper floor to the main level was steep, 12 steps. Oak handrail I had refinished myself 5 years earlier. Solid work. You still had to be careful on those steps. When I reached the bottom, Matthew was already standing in the entryway, face flushed, eyes red-rimmed. The sharp scent of alcohol reached me from several feet away. "Good evening," I asked evenly. He spun toward me. "Where's the checkbook?" "It's in my office." "Why?" "I need it." "No." His jaw tightened. "I'm not asking permission, old man. I need money. Now." I kept my voice level. "The answer is still no." Danielle appeared from the kitchen, phone in hand. She glanced between us, and I could see her quickly calculating whether to step in or let the moment unfold. "Dad, just give him the checkbook," she said. "We'll pay you back." "You've said that before." Matthew took a step closer. He stood 4 inches taller and easily 40 pounds heavier. In his mind, that made him intimidating. To me, it only made him predictable. "I lost some money tonight," he said, voice dropping to something dangerous. "Bad luck. It happens. But I've got a sure thing tomorrow, and I need capital." "You gambled away more money you don't have." His face darkened. That's none of your business. It is when you're asking for mine. I'm not asking. His voice rose to a shout. This is my house, too. That's my money, too. Actually, it's not, on either count. Something shifted in his expression. Pure rage, unchecked and unfiltered. You know what? I'm sick of this. Sick of you. Walking around like you own the place? I do own the place. Get out, Matthew screamed. Get out, you cheap old man. I'd started back up the stairs, deciding this conversation was over. I was 3 steps up when I felt his hands on my back. The push was hard, violent, designed to hurt. I fell. 12 steps. I counted everyone. My shoulder hit the 3rd step, my hip the 6th. My head glanced off the 9th. The world spun, wood and walls and pain blurring together. I hit the floor hard. The impact drove the air from my lungs. Fire exploded in my right side. Ribs. Definitely ribs. My head felt like it had been split open. My right wrist screamed when I tried to move it. Through the haze of pain, I heard Danielle's footsteps. Matthew, what did you do? He fell. The old fool lost his balance. I tried to speak, but only a groan came out. The pain in my side was excruciating, every breath like knives. Danielle stood over me. Our eyes met. I saw my daughter looking down at her father, broken and bleeding on the hardwood floor, and she laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a shocked laugh, a cold, genuine laugh of satisfaction. Good, she said. Let him lie there and think about his behavior. Maybe next time he'll be more cooperative. They walked away, into the living room. I could hear the TV turn on. My phone. I needed my phone. It took 3 tries to get my left hand into my pocket. My right arm was useless, the wrist swelling already. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through my ribs. The phone screen swam in my vision. Concussion, probably. I blinked hard, trying to focus. 911. My fingers felt thick and clumsy, but I managed to dial. 911. What's your emergency? 1547. Lafayette. My voice came out as a whisper. Fell. Need help. Sir, can you repeat that? 1547. Lafayette Street. The room was starting to tilt. Darkness crept in at the edges of my vision. Fell down. Stairs. Hurt. Help is on the way, sir. Stay on the line. But the phone slipped from my fingers. The darkness rushed in, and I let it take me. When I woke, seconds later, minutes, I could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. I smiled, even though it hurt, even though everything hurt. Help was coming, and Matthew and Danielle had no idea what kind of help it really was. The sirens stopped, outside. Car doors slammed, heavy footsteps on the porch. Through my haze of pain, I heard the doorbell, then pounding. Police! Open the door! Danielle's voice high and panicked. Coming! Just a second! I lay where I'd fallen, each breath a struggle. The taste of copper in my mouth told me I'd bitten my tongue. My vision kept swimming in and out of focus. The front door opened. Officers, thank goodness you're here. Danielle's voice had transformed into something breathy and concerned. My father fell. We were just about to call an ambulance. Ma'am, we received a 911 call from this address 11 minutes ago. A pause. Oh, yes, that must have been... we called right away, of course. May we come in? Footsteps in the hallway. 2 sets, judging by the sound. Then I heard a sharp intake of breath. Get EMS in here now. A male voice, young. We've got an elderly male, conscious but injured, possible head trauma. A flashlight beam swept across my face. I tried to focus on the officer kneeling beside me. Young guy, maybe late 20s, African-American, nameplate reading Turner. Sir, can you hear me? Help is coming. Can you tell me your name? Russell, I managed. Russell Harrison. He leaned closer, shining his light in my eyes, checking my pupils, professional and efficient. Then he went very still. Wait, Harrison? Russell Harrison? Yes. His eyes widened. He looked up at his partner, a Hispanic woman in her 30s. Gomez, this is Chief Inspector Harrison. What? She moved closer, staring down at me. Are you sure? I'm sure. Turner's voice had changed, become more urgent. He grabbed his radio. Dispatch. This is Unit 47. We need immediate EMS to 1547 Lafayette Street. Victim is former Chief Inspector Russell Harrison. Repeat. Victim is Russell Harrison. Even through the pain, I heard the shift in his tone. Respect, concern, the kind of response reserved for one of their own. From across the room, Matthew's voice. What? What are you talking about, Chief Inspector? Turner stood, turning to face them. His entire demeanor had changed. This wasn't just a routine call anymore. Your father-in-law is Russell Harrison, retired Chief Inspector of the Denver Police Department. I watched Danielle's face drain of color, watched Matthew's mouth fall open. No, Danielle said. No, he's a retired police officer, but not... Ma'am, I know who Russell Harrison is. Turner's voice had gone cold. Every officer in Denver knows who he is. 3 medals of valor, 42 years of service, solved over 200 homicide cases. Matthew had gone pale as milk. He never... More sirens. The paramedics arrived, professional and quick, but they had the same reaction when they heard my name. Chief Harrison, sir, we're going to take care of you. As they worked, checking vitals, stabilizing my neck, preparing to move me, I watched Matthew and Danielle. They stood against the wall like suspects in an interrogation room, which in a way they were. Officer Gomez had pulled out her notepad. I need to ask some questions. You said he fell? Yes, Danielle said quickly. He was coming down the stairs and just lost his balance. And you called 911 immediately? Yes. Well, Matthew did. Or I did. I don't remember exactly. It happened so fast. Ma'am, the 911 call came from the victim's phone, not yours. Danielle's eyes flickered with panic. Oh, right. He must have called while we were looking for our phones. Everything was so confusing. Where were you when he fell? I was in the kitchen. And you, sir? Matthew's Adam's apple bobbed. Living room. So neither of you witnessed the fall? No, yes. Danielle was flustered now, the lies tangling. I heard it, the noise, and came running. Turner was taking notes. I could see his skepticism from across the room. The paramedics lifted me onto the gurney. Everything screamed in protest, but I managed to catch Turner's eye as they wheeled me past. Officer, I whispered. He leaned down. Sir? My workshop, 2nd floor, voice recorder, in the top drawer of the workbench. His eyes sharpened. Sir? Evidence? I breathed. Everything's recorded. A flash of understanding crossed his face. He nodded once, subtle enough that Danielle and Matthew wouldn't notice. As they carried me out to the ambulance, I heard Danielle's voice rising in pitch. Officers, our statements. We need to give our statements. We want to help, however we can. I almost laughed, but it hurt too much. They were scrambling now, trying to control the narrative, trying to make themselves look helpful, concerned, innocent, but they'd made their critical mistake. They'd assumed I was just a helpless old man. They'd assumed wrong. The ambulance doors closed. The siren wailed to life. As we pulled away from Lafayette Street, I stared up at the ceiling, cataloging my injuries. 3 broken ribs, probable concussion, sprained wrist. Worth it. Because I'd seen their faces when they realized who I really was. Seen the moment the ground dropped out from under them. Seen the exact second they understood they'd assaulted a legend of the Denver Police Department. And this was just the beginning. Matthew wanted to get rid of the old man. Danielle wanted me out of the way. They were about to learn that some old men bite back. The paramedic leaned over me. Hang in there, Chief. We're almost at Denver Health. I closed my eyes, letting the morphine they'd given me start to work. Somewhere in that house, Officer Turner was probably already climbing the stairs to my workshop, already finding the recorder with 14 hours of Matthew and Danielle, plotting, scheming, admitting to their plans, already building a case that would destroy them. I'd spent my entire career putting criminals behind bars. Tonight, I just added 2 more to the list. My daughter, my son-in-law. Justice doesn't care about blood relations. I'd taught that to every detective I'd ever trained. Time to prove I still believed it. I woke in the hospital the next morning to find Brian Morgan sitting beside my bed. Brian, Detective Brian Morgan, had been my partner for 8 years before I made Chief Inspector. We'd worked hundreds of cases together, shared countless stakeouts, saved each other's lives more than once. He was 52 now, graying at the temples, but his eyes still had that sharp investigator's focus. "Old friend," I croaked. My throat felt like sandpaper. He leaned forward, relief washing over his face. Russell, how are you feeling? Like I fell down 12 stairs. A ghost of a smile. The doctors say you're lucky. 3 broken ribs, concussion, sprained wrist. Could have been worse. Could have been better if my son-in-law hadn't pushed me. Brian's expression hardened. Tell me everything. So I did. Despite the pain screaming through my ribs with every breath, I gave him the methodical account I'd spent my career perfecting. The timeline of abuse, the recordings, the evidence I'd collected, the gambling debts, the overheard conversations about getting rid of me. Brian took notes, his jaw tightening with every detail. The recorder's in my workshop, I finished. Top drawer of the workbench. Turner should have found it last night. He did. I listened to some of it this morning. Brian shook his head. Your own daughter, Russell. Not the daughter I raised. That girl disappeared somewhere along the way. He stood, pacing to the window. They gave statements last night. Said you fell. Said they immediately tried to help. Classic cover story. But the 911 call came from my phone. Exactly. Timeline doesn't match their version. Plus, Turner noted their demeanor was off. Too calm for people whose father had just suffered a serious fall. He turned back to me. I'm going to nail them, Russell. For you. For the law, Brian. Not for me. Do it right. Always. He paused. There's something else you should know. Word spreading. About who you are. About what happened. Good. His eyebrows rose. Good? I smiled, though it hurt. Let them know. Let everyone know that they assaulted a chief inspector. Let them understand exactly what kind of trouble they're in. Over the next few days, Brian worked the case like it was a homicide. He interviewed the neighbors. Mrs. Chen from next door testified she'd heard shouting and a loud crash. The Johnsons across the street confirmed they'd seen Matthew stumbling drunk into the house hours before. Mr. Rodriguez, 2 doors down, mentioned hearing arguments about money multiple times over the past months. The medical examiner's report came back definitive. My injuries were inconsistent with a simple fall. The bruising pattern on my back showed clear handprints. Matthew's handprints, once they compared measurements. Brian came to see me on the 4th day, a satisfied look on his face. We've got enough for arrest warrants. 2nd-degree assault for Matthew. Failure to render aid for Danielle. Maybe accomplice after the fact, depending on what the DA wants to pursue. When? Tomorrow morning, early. We'll bring a full team. I want to be there. Russell, you're in the hospital. I'll be fine. I need to see their faces when it happens. He studied me for a long moment. All right, but you're staying in the car. The next morning, I sat in Brian's unmarked sedan outside my house at 6:15. My ribs were taped, my arm in a sling, but I wouldn't have missed this for anything. 6 patrol cars pulled up. Officers poured out. I counted 8, plus Brian and 2 detectives from the domestic violence unit. Serious numbers for a serious crime. Brian led the group to the front door. Knocked hard. Through the car window, I watched Danielle open the door. Even from a distance, I could see her confusion shift to alarm as she took in the crowd of uniforms. Brian said something. Danielle shook her head, gesturing. Then Matthew appeared behind her, hair disheveled, still in pajama pants, and froze. Brian held up the arrest warrant. I couldn't hear his words, but I'd heard that speech 100 times. I could see Matthew's face go from confusion to shock to stark white terror. Matthew Cooper, you're under arrest for 2nd-degree assault on former Chief Inspector Russell Harrison. Even from the car, I saw Matthew's mouth drop open. Saw him say something, probably, What? What, Inspector? His hands coming up in a defensive gesture. Danielle was shouting now. I could hear her voice, rising, shrill with panic. My father's just a retired officer. This is ridiculous. Officer Turner, the young officer from that first night, stepped forward. His voice carried across the yard. Ma'am, your father is Russell Harrison. 42 years with Denver PD. 3 medals of valor. Solved 237 homicide cases. He's not just a retired officer, he's a legend. The color drained from Danielle's face like someone had pulled a plug. Matthew tried to back away, but 2 officers were already moving in. They turned him around, pulled his arms behind his back. The click of handcuffs echoed across the quiet morning street. Neighbors were coming out now. Mrs. Chen on her porch, hand over her mouth. The Johnsons standing in their driveway, watching. curtains twitching in every window on the block. This wasn't just an arrest. This was public shame, community judgment, everything Matthew and Danielle had tried to avoid by maintaining their facade of concerned family members. Danielle was crying now, but Brian was reading her rights too. Danielle Harrison Cooper, you're under arrest as an accomplice. They loaded both of them into separate patrol cars. As Matthew's car pulled away, he looked toward Brian's sedan. Our eyes met through the window. I smiled. Just a small smile, but I made sure he saw it. Made sure he understood that this wasn't accidental. This wasn't bad luck. This was consequences. Matthew's face contorted with rage and fear before the car turned the corner. Brian came back to the sedan, sliding into the driver's seat. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like justice is working the way it should." He started the engine. "The DA's office is already getting calls from the media. Former chief inspector assaulted by his own family. It's going to be a circus. Let it be. I've got nothing to hide." "They're going to fight this, Russell. They'll lawyer up, claim it was an accident, that you're confused from the head injury." I pulled out my phone, opened the file where I'd been storing evidence for weeks. "Let them try. I've got 14 hours of recordings, photos of their document searches, text messages demanding money, a timeline of escalating abuse. I've been building this case since the day I realized what they were planning." Brian glanced at the phone, then at me, shaking his head with something like admiration. "Once a cop, always a cop." "They thought they were hunting a wounded animal," I said. "They didn't realize the animal had been hunting them right back." They released me from the hospital 4 days later. Brian picked me up, drove me back to Lafayette Street. The house felt different. Empty, but in a good way. The tension that had filled every room for months was gone. I could breathe again. Brian helped me change the locks, every single one. New keys, new deadbolts. My house, my rules, my security. "They made bail," he said as he worked on the front door. "Matthew's was $75,000. Danielle's was $50. Her mother posted it. Barbara, my ex-wife, I hadn't spoken to her in 3 years. She still thinks I'm the villain in every story. Does it matter? Not anymore. But I was wrong about that. 2 days later, Barbara showed up at my door. She looked older than I remembered. 70 now, her hair gone completely gray. But her eyes still had that hard edge I'd learned to recognize decades ago. "Russell." "Barbara." We stood there, two people who'd once promised forever and barely made it 20 years. "You're destroying our daughter," she said. Our daughter laughed while I lay bleeding on the floor. She stood there and did nothing while her husband nearly killed me. "That's not what she told me. She said it was an accident, that you fell and they panicked." I pulled up the recording app on my phone, found one of the conversations from 2 weeks before the assault. "Listen," Danielle's voice came through clearly. "We just need him out of the way. The house, the money, all of it should be ours. He's had his life." Matthew responding, "How long do you think we have to wait? He could live another 10 years. "Not if we make things uncomfortable enough. Stress does terrible things to old people." Barbara's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" "From my workshop, where I recorded every conversation they had while planning to steal everything from me." "You were spying on your own daughter?" "I was documenting elder abuse and attempted fraud." "There's a difference." She was quiet for a long moment. "This will ruin her life, Russell. She was planning to ruin mine. I'm just making sure the law does what it's supposed to do. She's our child. She stopped being my child when she chose greed over family. I taught her better than this, Barbara. We both did. But somewhere along the way, she decided that money mattered more than integrity." Barbara left without another word. The next week, their lawyer tried to get the charges reduced. Lawrence Kemp, expensive defense attorney from a downtown firm. He came at the case hard, arguing that I was vindictive, that the recordings were inadmissible, that my head injury had confused my memories. But Gerald Wilson, my lawyer, was ready for every move. "Mr. Harrison has documented evidence spanning 3 months," Gerald told the judge at the preliminary hearing. "Voice recordings, photographs, text messages, witness testimony from neighbors. The medical examiner's report clearly shows assault, not an accidental fall. And let's not forget, this isn't just any victim. This is a decorated police officer with an impeccable reputation and 42 years of service. The judge denied the motion to reduce charges. Matthew and Danielle's desperation grew. They tried to access my bank accounts. I'd already frozen them. They tried to enter the house. The new locks kept them out. They even tried to get Barbara declared as my emergency contact so they could claim I was incompetent. But my medical records showed I was completely lucid and capable. Every move they made, I countered. Every scheme they attempted, I shut down. Because I'd spent 4 decades learning how criminals think, how they operate, how they make mistakes when they're desperate. And they were very desperate now. One afternoon, Gerald called with an update. They want to negotiate a plea deal. I was in my workshop, sanding a piece of maple. No deals. Russell, if this goes to trial, it goes to trial. They need to face the full consequences of what they did. Their lawyer's going to argue that you're a bitter old man seeking revenge. Then let him argue it. The evidence speaks for itself. But I wasn't done yet. On a Friday morning, I met with Gerald at his office to discuss the civil suit. I want to file for damages, I told him. Physical injuries, emotional distress, property that was stolen or damaged during their residence. Gerald pulled up his notes. I've been documenting everything. Medical bills currently at $47,000. We can argue pain and suffering, loss of enjoyment of life, intentional infliction of emotional distress. In Colorado, juries can award substantial damages for elder abuse cases. How substantial? If we can prove everything you're claiming, $850,000 wouldn't be unreasonable. I smiled. File it for the full amount. The civil suit hit them like a freight train. Their lawyer tried to get it delayed until after the criminal trial, but the judge allowed it to proceed in parallel. Matthew's gambling debts were exposed during discovery. $47,000 owed to various bookies and casinos, his failed businesses, the maxed-out credit cards in both his and Danielle's names. Danielle's emails to Barbara were uncovered, the ones where she'd been planning to have me declared incompetent for months. Every dirty secret, every scheme, every lie. All of it came out in depositions and court filings. I watched them squirm, watched their expensive lawyer's confidence crack, watched their story fall apart piece by piece. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. And justice was methodical, thorough, and absolutely merciless when the evidence was this clear. One evening, Brian stopped by with takeout. We sat in my kitchen eating Chinese food like we'd done 1,000 times during late-night stakeouts. The DA's offering them one last chance to plead out, he said. Matthew takes 3 years. Danielle takes probation and community service. And? They're considering it. Their lawyer knows they'll lose at trial. I set down my chopsticks. I want them to understand something, Brian. This isn't about punishment. It's about accountability. They need to face what they did. They will. Either way, they will. But I knew Matthew and Danielle. Knew they'd fight until they had no other option. Knew they'd only accept reality when it was forced on them. The trial was set for 3 months away, and I had every intention of being there to watch justice prevail. 3 months later, the trial began. The courthouse was packed. News crews lined the steps outside. Former colleagues from the department filled the gallery. This wasn't just another assault case. It was a statement about how we treat the people who've spent their lives protecting us. I walked into that courtroom with my head high, my ribs finally healed, my wrists still a little stiff but functional. Gerald Wilson walked beside me, briefcase in hand, confident and prepared. Matthew and Danielle sat at the defense table with Lawrence Kemp. Matthew looked thinner, his expensive clothes hanging loose on his frame. Danielle kept her eyes down, hands twisted together in her lap. They looked defeated already. Good. The prosecution went first. The district attorney's office had assigned their best. Sandra Mitchell, a prosecutor with a reputation for thoroughness and a particular passion for elder abuse cases. She laid out the timeline with surgical precision. The year of escalating abuse, the financial manipulation, the recordings of them planning to get rid of me, the assault itself, the medical evidence. Then she called me to the stand. I took my seat, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Not that I needed the reminder. Truth was all I had. Sandra walked me through it. Every detail, every conversation, every moment of degradation and abuse. Mr. Harrison, can you describe what happened on the evening of the assault? I looked directly at the jury. I was coming down the stairs from my workshop. Matthew was drunk, angry about money he'd lost gambling. We argued. He told me to get out of my own house. Then he pushed me. Hard. I fell 12 steps and landed on the hardwood floor. What happened next? My daughter Danielle came out of the kitchen. She looked down at me, saw I was injured and in pain, and she laughed. A murmur ran through the courtroom. I saw several jurors' faces harden. Sandra played the recordings. Matthew and Danielle's voices filled the room, discussing how to get rid of the old man, how to manipulate me, how to take everything I'd worked for. I watched the jury's faces, watched disgust and anger replace any sympathy they might have felt. Then came the medical evidence. Photos of my injuries, the bruising, the swelling, the clear handprints on my back. The expert testimony explaining how these injuries were inconsistent with a simple fall. When it was defense's turn, Kemp tried everything. He suggested my recordings were taken out of context. He implied my head injury had confused my memories. He painted me as a vindictive old man seeking revenge on his family. But every argument hit the wall of evidence. Every insinuation crumbled under cross-examination. Then Kemp called Matthew to the stand. "Mr. Cooper, did you intentionally try to hurt your father-in-law?" Matthew's voice was quiet. "No, I was drunk. I didn't mean it was an accident." Sandra stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Cooper, you told Mr. Harrison to get out immediately before pushing him, correct?" "Yes, but—" "And you'd been planning for months to take control of his assets, correct?" "We were just talking. We have 14 hours of recordings of you and your wife discussing exactly that. Were all those conversations just talking?" Matthew's face went red. "We needed the money. He had so much, and we had nothing." "So you felt entitled to it? He's family. Family is supposed to help. And when family says no, you push them down the stairs?" "That's not what happened." But it was. Everyone in that courtroom knew it was. Danielle took the stand next, tears streaming down her face. She'd been practicing this moment, I could tell. The remorseful daughter, the concerned child who'd made a terrible mistake. "I was scared," she sobbed. "Dad was on the floor, and I didn't know what to do. I know I should have called for help immediately, but I panicked." Sandra approached with the recording device. "Ms. Harrison Cooper, I'm going to play something for the jury." The recording was from 2 weeks before the assault. Danielle's voice clear and cold. "He's had his life. It's our turn now. If we have to wait for him to die naturally, we could be waiting 20 years. Danielle's face drained of color. "I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean what you said, or you didn't mean for anyone to hear it." The tears stopped. Danielle had nothing left. The trial lasted a week. Closing arguments were powerful on both sides, but the evidence told only one story. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts. I sat in the gallery and watched Matthew's head drop into his hands, watched Danielle start crying again, this time with genuine despair rather than performance. Sentencing came a week later. The judge was Ruth Henderson, a woman I'd worked with on dozens of cases during my career. Fair, tough, no nonsense. She looked at Matthew and Danielle with something close to contempt. "This court has seen many things, but the deliberate abuse of a parent, a decorated public servant who spent his life protecting this community, is particularly egregious. Matthew Cooper, you are sentenced to 4 years in the Colorado Department of Corrections for second-degree assault." Matthew's shoulders shook. His lawyer touched his arm, but there was nothing more to be done. "Danielle Harrison Cooper, you are sentenced to 18 months for failure to render aid and acting as an accomplice." Danielle looked at me then, really looked at me, and in her eyes I saw the final realization. This was real. This was happening. Her father had destroyed her life the same way she'd tried to destroy his. "No," I thought, "I didn't destroy your life. You did that yourself." The civil suit was settled the same day. $850,000 in damages. Their lawyer tried to negotiate, but Gerald shut it down immediately. "Pay in full, or we'll garnish every asset, every paycheck, every penny they earn for the rest of their lives." They had no choice. The BMW was seized. The jewelry Danielle had bought on credit. Everything of value they owned went to pay the judgment. I walked out of that courthouse into the Denver sunshine, feeling lighter than I had in years. Justice had been served. Completely. Thoroughly. Without mercy. Exactly as it should be. 4 months after the sentencing, I sat in my workshop on a cool afternoon, sanding a new table I'd been building. Oak this time, with intricate joinery that required patience and precision, the kind of work that cleared my mind and reminded me why I loved this craft. Matthew was in a medium security facility 2 hours outside Denver. I'd heard he was working in the prison woodshop, ironically enough, learning a trade he'd mocked when I practiced it. Danielle was serving her sentence at the Denver Women's Correctional Facility. Closer, but I hadn't visited. Didn't plan to. Their assets had been liquidated. Every penny of the $850,000 judgment had been paid. Some I'd donated to organizations supporting elder abuse victims. The rest I'd invested. Not for me. I didn't need it. But maybe someday it would do some good for someone else. A letter had arrived 3 weeks ago. From Danielle, prison stationery. Her handwriting still the same looping script I remembered from when she was a girl. Dad, I'm so sorry. I understand now what I did to you. I was wrong. I was greedy and cruel, and I destroyed our relationship. I know you probably won't forgive me, but I want you to know I've changed. I'm getting help. I want to be better. Please, can we talk? I'd read it twice, then folded it and put it in a drawer. Maybe in a year I'd respond, maybe not. Right now, I didn't owe her anything. She'd made her choices. Now she was living with the consequences. The house was quiet again. Peaceful. Mine. I'd started teaching a woodworking class at the community center on Saturday mornings. 8 students, ranging from teenagers to retirees, learning to work with their hands and create something beautiful. It felt good. Productive. Like giving back without giving in to people who didn't deserve it. The front door opened downstairs. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. Russell, you up there? Brian, I smiled. Workshop. He appeared in the doorway, 2 cups of coffee from the place down the street. Brought you the usual. You're a lifesaver. We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the afternoon light filter through the window, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. How are you doing? Brian asked finally. Really? I considered the question. Good. Better than good, actually. I wake up without dreading what the day will bring. I work on projects I enjoy. I teach people who want to learn. The house is mine again. No regrets? About what? Holding them accountable. Making sure they face justice. I shook my head. They got exactly what they deserved. Not more, not less. The law worked the way it's supposed to. Brian nodded. You know, when this first started, I wondered if you'd go too hard. Let anger drive you instead of justice. I'm not angry anymore. Haven't been for months. Anger clouds judgment. This was never about anger. It was about making sure the system protected someone who couldn't protect himself in that moment. You could have protected yourself? I smiled. I did. By trusting the law I spent 42 years upholding. By building a case instead of seeking revenge. By being patient and methodical instead of emotional and reactive. Still, Brian took a sip of coffee. Your own daughter. That had to hurt. It did. Still did sometimes. But that was something I'd work through on my own time, in my own way. She made her choices, I said simply. I made mine. We both have to live with the consequences. My phone buzzed. A text from the gallery downtown. They wanted to feature 3 of my pieces in their winter show. Local artisans, handcrafted furniture, the kind of exposure that could lead to real sales. I showed Brian the message. He grinned. Look at you, retired chief inspector turned furniture artist. I always was a furniture artist. Just did the chief inspector thing on the side for 42 years. He laughed. It felt good to laugh, to joke, to move forward instead of dwelling on the past. You planning to go fishing this season? Brian asked. Already booked a cabin in the mountains for November. 2 weeks, just me and the river and whatever fish are dumb enough to bite. Sounds perfect. It did sound perfect. Peaceful. Solitary in the best way possible. The afternoon stretched into evening. Brian left around 6, promising to stop by again soon. I returned to my table, running my hand over the smooth oak surface. The scars from the fall had faded. My ribs were healed. My wrist was back to full strength. My body had recovered. My life had recovered too. I looked around my workshop, the tools organized on the wall, the half-finished projects on the benches, the smell of sawdust and varnish that had become as familiar as breathing. This was home. This was peace. This was justice. Not the dramatic, explosive kind you see in movies. The quiet, methodical kind that actually works in the real world. The kind that holds people accountable through evidence and law, rather than violence and revenge. I'd spent my entire career fighting for that kind of justice for others. This time I'd fought for it for myself. And I'd won. Not because I was stronger or smarter or more ruthless than Matthew and Danielle, but because I understood something they never had, that actions have consequences, that the law exists for a reason, and that trying to cheat the system only works until it doesn't. They'd learned that lesson now, the hard way. As the sun set over Denver, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, I stood at my workshop window and looked out at the city I'd served for so long. Somewhere out there, Matthew was in a cell, learning what it meant to face consequences. Danielle was too, finally understanding that actions born of greed and cruelty don't lead anywhere good. And here I was, free, whole, moving forward. Justice hadn't just been served. Justice had prevailed, exactly as it was always meant to. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments.